We all know that the situation in the DPRK is escalating. Military drills on both sides are increasing. The DPRK is firing more missile tests, etc., because we've reached the point where the DPRK has gotten to a level of nuclear development that the imperialists cannot stand anymore. In other words, they've gone from a power to create a deterrent from being invaded to having an outright serious power, like a real ability to do damage to anyone if they try to harm them. And even I and some other people guess that we're now at the point where the DPRK can launch a missile that can reach the mainland United States. Now there's something very important going on here. The DPRK is not going to back down on this one, and they've made this very clear. They have now actually publicly told their own people to prepare for another Arduous March. That's right. If you know your DPRK history, then you know that the Arduous March is the period following the end of the Soviet Union, where through the loss of 70% of their trade, weather difficulties, and the fact that much of their soil had been destroyed during the Korean War, 3 million people ended up dying, along with the sanctions and blockades against them, etc., mostly enforced by the United States. They're telling their people to prepare for another one of these. That's how serious it is. The DPRK is telling them, okay, get ready. The imperialists are coming at us so hard, it's going to cost millions of our lives. And that's where they are right now. What they actually said in their own media was, we may have to go on an arduous march, during which we will have to chew the roots of plants once again. Yes, that's how bad it's getting. They're outright saying now to be prepared for another few million people to die. And this phrase of going back to eating the roots of plants is a symbol of the shortage of food that they had during that time. And they're saying, this is how bad it's going to get. Get ready for it, because we're going to just make our way through an arduous march once again. We're not going to back down. And that's how bad it's going to be. Already, everything is being blockaded. Even China's blockading this stuff to the DPRK. They're even sending back DPRK exports, like the stuff that they normally purchase from them. Any ship that goes to the DPRK, that docks in one of their ports, is immediately blacklisted by the South and other countries that will never be able to do business ever again. So nobody's going to go there ever for any reason. So you see that they're not just stopping themselves and other countries, they're essentially sabotaging anyone else from possibly sending the supplies that they need, the trade that they need to conduct in order to get by. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Supposedly an internal document was released that was made by the Workers' Party of Korea condemning the Chinese for their participation in the imperialist sanctions and punishments against the DPRK, and they outright seriously denounced the country. All party members and workers must join in soundly crushing China's pressuring schemes with the force of a nuclear storm for its betrayal of socialism. China had never once been sincere towards the North, especially when its revolutionary efforts ran into challenges and struggles. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this was true. I mean, you have to figure that since China is going hard with all these sanctions and attacks against the DPRK, which has traditionally been their ally, that they would say something like this. Now, this document, if it's real, was never intended for public distribution, but it was intended for internal circulation. Who knows, maybe this is fake, and somebody put it out, the imperialists put it out on purpose in order to try to damage the now fragile relations between the two countries. But it seems very likely that this statement could very much be real. And I think one thing that really says how much China has not been a friend of the DPRK has been the fact that since the creation of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which was a smaller kind of World Bank that was created by a few Asian countries to compete with the World Bank. In other words, they're tired of a lot of the World Bank's terrible practices. So they figured that they could engage in their own terrible practices. China has blocked, China being the main power behind this bank, has blocked the DPRK from being able to join it. So they're outright saying that the DPRK is not allowed to have a semi-autonomous ability to borrow money, engage in commerce, etc., to develop their own situation. So now they're forced to take loans from China, etc., have to go through them. So China maintains a very powerful position over them, which is not acting like a very good ally at all. Because, of course, China does have a very strong interest in keeping the DPRK under its leash. It wants it as a cheap labor pool. They want it for cheap resources, etc. And what they want primarily is a stable government in the DPRK. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did want to get rid of Kim Jong-un, someone who was so confrontational against the West, someone who was willing to rattle cages, someone who's willing to shut down industrial zones, special economic zones, etc. And they would like someone who would just be a lot more friendly, just do whatever we tell you and then everything will be fine. The problem is that the DPRK is too adamant about its own independence. And these are the real new developments that have taken place in the last week or so. And something that very definitely shows us that the DPRK is not going to back down and is fully willing to experience its own annihilation in order to defend its own independence. Thank you for watching. Why don't you go ahead, rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media. And if you want, you can head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you could head over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.